I am Alexis Harper, 34 years old, and until last month I owned a beautiful lake house that my grandfather left me when he passed away. It was my sanctuary filled with childhood memories, and the only place I truly felt at peace. That was until I discovered my parents had sold it without my permission to fund my sister Catherine's $150,000 wedding. When I confronted them, they just laughed and said, "Thanks for the wedding present." If you have ever had your trust betrayed by family, you know that hollow feeling in your chest. I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop a like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up for yourself against people who should have had your back. Growing up in our middle-class home in suburban New Jersey, the dynamic between me, my sister, and our parents was established early. Our house was modest but comfortable, located in a neighborhood with good schools and tree-lined streets. My parents, Robert and Elizabeth Harper, were hardworking people who wanted the best for their daughters, but their definition of best always seemed to vary depending on which daughter they were considering. From elementary school onward, my sister Catherine and I could not have been more different. I was the practical one, always with my nose in a book, fascinated by how things worked. Math came naturally to me, and I would spend hours solving puzzles and problems while other kids played outside. Catherine, 2 years younger than me, was the social butterfly. Beautiful from a young age. With natural blonde hair and an infectious laugh, she drew people to her effortlessly. While I was winning science fairs, she was being crowned at beauty pageants. Catherine just has that special something, my mother would say after these events, her eyes shining with pride. My academic achievements were acknowledged with brief nods and generic phrases like, "Good job," but Catherine's social triumphs were celebrated with parties and special dinners. My grandfather Thomas was different. Dad's father, he was a self-made man who built a successful construction business from nothing. He recognized something in me that my parents seemed to miss. "You have got a mind like a steel trap, Lexi," he would tell me during our weekend fishing trips at his lake house. "Keep sharpening it, and you will go places others cannot even imagine." Those words sustained me through many lonely nights when I felt invisible in my own home. College amplified the disparity in how we were treated. I received partial scholarships but worked 3 jobs simultaneously to cover the rest of my computer science degree at Rutgers. I was a library assistant during days, waited tables at night, and did programming freelance work on weekends. Meanwhile, Catherine's education at a private liberal arts college was fully funded by my parents, including a semester abroad in Italy that cost more than my entire year's tuition. "Your sister needs the full college experience to make connections," my father explained when I questioned this. "You are so independent, Alexis. We know you can handle things on your own." This pattern of justification became the soundtrack of my family life. My independence, rather than being recognized as something I had developed out of necessity, was used as an excuse to give Catherine more support, more attention, more resources. After graduation, I secured a job at a tech startup in New York City. The hours were brutal, but the experience was invaluable. Within 5 years, I had moved up to senior software engineer at one of the top tech companies with a salary that finally allowed me financial security. Catherine, meanwhile, bounced between marketing jobs, never staying anywhere longer than 8 months before deciding it was not the right fit. Each time she quit without having another position lined up, my parents would cover her rent and expenses until she found something new. When I suggested this might be enabling her, my mother bristled. "Not everyone finds their path as easily as you did, Alexis. Catherine is still discovering herself." At 30, Catherine was still discovering herself when my grandfather passed away. His death hit me harder than I could have imagined. He had been the one person in my family who seemed to truly see me to value my practical nature and work ethic, rather than viewing them as less interesting than Catherine's charisma. The reading of his will shocked everyone except me. While he left modest sums to various family members, including Catherine, he left his prized possession, the lake house where we had spent countless weekends fishing and talking about life, to me. To my granddaughter, Alexis, the lawyer read, who understands the value of building something that lasts, I leave my lake house and surrounding property. She alone among my descendants appreciates this land. Not for its monetary value, but for the peace it provides and the memories it holds. My parents were visibly stunned. The property was worth close to $700,000, and while they had expected me to receive something, this significant asset had apparently been earmarked for me alone. He always did favor you, my mother said later, not bothering to hide her disapproval. Out of goodwill and a desire to keep peace in the family, I told my parents they could continue to use the lake house seasonally as they had during my grandfather's lifetime. I had my apartment in the city and could not be there all the time anyway. This arrangement seemed to smooth things over, though there was always an undercurrent of resentment when the lake house was mentioned. 4 years passed this way, with me visiting the lake house monthly for weekend retreats, and my parents using it occasionally during summer months. Catherine rarely visited, claiming the mosquitoes and lack of nightlife made it boring. Everything changed when Catherine met Craig Williams at a charity gala. Craig came from old money, worked in finance, and was obsessed with appearances and social status. Within 6 months they were engaged, and Catherine transformed from somewhat spoiled sister to someone I barely recognized. It all started innocently enough with a family dinner where Catherine announced that she and Craig had found the perfect venue for their wedding, Lakeside Gardens, an exclusive estate that typically hosted celebrities and politicians. "It is absolutely magical," Catherine gushed, showing us photos on her phone. "The ceremony will be on the lawn overlooking the water, then cocktails in the garden, and the reception in their crystal pavilion." I nodded politely, though warning bells were already sounding in my head. "That looks beautiful, but also expensive. Have you and Craig worked out a budget?" Catherine waved her hand dismissively. "Craig says we only get married once, so we should do it right. Besides, Mom and Dad already said they would help." I glanced at our parents, who were beaming at Catherine. "We want to give our little girl the wedding of her dreams," Mom said, squeezing Catherine's hand. The conversation shifted to dresses and flowers, but later that evening I pulled my father aside. "Dad, those high-end venues can run into the hundreds of thousands. Are you and Mom really prepared for that?" His expression clouded momentarily before he patted my shoulder. "Do not worry about us, Alexis. We have been saving for Catherine's wedding since she was born. We will make it work." What I did not know then was that making it work would eventually involve my lake house. As weeks passed, the wedding plans grew increasingly extravagant. The guest list ballooned from 150 to 300 people. Catherine insisted on flying in a specific photographer from Paris and having custom gowns made for her 7 bridesmaids. The cake alone was priced at $5,000. During a Saturday brunch about 2 months into planning, I suggested some alternatives to help reduce costs. "What about having the ceremony at the country club instead? It is still elegant, but would cost half as much," I offered. Catherine's eyes immediately welled with tears. "I cannot believe you are trying to ruin my wedding," she said, voice trembling. "This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life." My mother shot me a reproachful look while Dad awkwardly examined his coffee cup. "I am not trying to ruin anything," I explained carefully. "I just want to make sure this does not put financial strain on the family." "We have it under control," my father insisted, though the new lines around his eyes suggested otherwise. After that, I was effectively shut out of wedding planning discussions. When I would ask how things were progressing, I would receive vague answers about how wonderfully everything was coming together. The actual details, and more importantly, the costs, were kept from me. About 3 months before the wedding date, I traveled to Seattle for a major project implementation. The assignment was critical for my career, potentially positioning me for a promotion to lead architect. For 3 intense weeks, I was completely immersed in work, often pulling 16-hour days and falling into bed exhausted. During this period, contact with my family was minimal. I missed several Sunday family dinners and was only vaguely aware that wedding preparations were intensifying. Catherine sent occasional texts, always focused on herself, stressed about floral arrangements or cake tasting today. So many choices. My success at work stood in stark contrast to the brewing storm at home. While I was receiving accolades for the Seattle project, my family was sinking deeper into financial trouble, though I would not discover this until later. When I returned to New York, I tried to reconnect with my family, suggesting dinner at their house the following weekend. "Oh, we are so busy with wedding errands," my mother demurred. "Maybe the weekend after." This pattern continued, with plans consistently postponed or canceled. When we finally did meet for dinner nearly a month after my return, the atmosphere was strained. Catherine dominated the conversation with wedding talk, referring to situations and decisions I knew nothing about. My father seemed unusually quiet, excusing himself repeatedly to take phone calls. "Is everything okay, Dad?" I asked when I helped him clear the dishes. "Just some business matters," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Nothing for you to worry about." I should have pressed harder, should have recognized the signs. But years of being told that I was overthinking, things that I was too analytical, had conditioned me to doubt my instincts where family was concerned. Meanwhile, Catherine was transforming before our eyes into what can only be described as a bridezilla. She fired vendors over minor issues, had meltdowns about napkin colors, and once called me at 2 in the morning to vent about how the wrong shade of roses had been ordered. "It is ivory, Alexis. Ivory. I specifically said cream. They are totally different." I murmured sympathetic noises while silently wondering how my pragmatic engineering mind had ended up in the same family as someone who could have an emotional breakdown over slightly different shades of off-white. As the wedding date approached, I noticed my parents appearing increasingly haggard. Mom had dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, and Dad had developed a nervous tic in his right eye. When I suggested they seemed stressed, Mom brushed it off as just wedding jitters and quickly changed the subject. In retrospect, these were all warning signs that something was seriously wrong. But I was busy with my own life, and they had deliberately kept me at arm's length during the planning process. I had no idea they had reached a breaking point financially, nor that they had set their sights on solving their problems with my property. The weekend before everything imploded, I had a brief, uncomfortable interaction with Catherine's fiancé at yet another pre-wedding event. While Catherine was busy showing her bridesmaids something on her phone, Craig sidled up to me at the bar. "Your parents are really going all out for this wedding," he said, swirling his scotch. "Much more than my parents expected, honestly." "Catherine has always known how to get what she wants," I replied neutrally. He gave me a curious look. "Must be nice having such generous parents. Mine believe in financial independence, tough love and all that." Before I could respond, Catherine called him over, and the moment passed. It was only later that I understood he had been fishing for information about my parents' financial situation, perhaps already aware they were overextending themselves. None of these scattered puzzle pieces came together until that fateful weekend when I decided to escape to the lake house for some much-needed solitude. After completing a stressful project and feeling distant from my increasingly wedding-obsessed family, I craved the peace that only my grandfather's property could provide. I had no idea I was driving toward the discovery that would shatter my relationship with my family forever. After a particularly grueling week finalizing code for a major client, I decided what I needed most was a weekend at the lake house. Nothing restored my spirit like sitting on the dock my grandfather and I had built together, listening to the water lapping against the shore and watching eagles soar overhead. I packed lightly on Friday afternoon. Just some comfortable clothes, my laptop for emergencies, and a few novels I had been meaning to read. The drive from New York City to the lake took about 3 hours, and I relished the transition from urban congestion to rolling countryside. As the sprawling oaks and maples thickened around the winding road leading to the property, I felt the knots in my shoulders begin to loosen. This place had always been my sanctuary, which is why the unfamiliar silver SUV in the driveway hit me like a physical blow. At first, I thought perhaps my parents had decided to use the house this weekend as well. Annoying but not catastrophic. We could share the space. But as I pulled up behind the vehicle, I noticed it had Maryland license plates. We knew no one from Maryland. Before I could process this, the front door opened, and a couple I had never seen before stepped onto the porch. The woman, perhaps in her mid-40s with a stylish bob, waved cheerfully. "Hello there," she called. "Can we help you?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I tried to make sense of the situation. Were these friends of my parents' renters? Had my mother decided to Airbnb the property without telling me? I stepped out of my car, confusion giving way to apprehension. "Hi," I said cautiously. "I am Alexis Harper. This is my lake house." The couple exchanged glances, their friendly expressions faltering. The man, tall with salt and pepper hair, stepped forward. "There must be some confusion," he said gently. "I am David Mercer, and this is my wife Laura. We purchased this property 6 weeks ago. We have the paperwork if you would like to see it." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "That is impossible," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "This house belongs to me. I inherited it from my grandfather 4 years ago." Laura Mercer's expression shifted to concern. Perhaps we should all sit down. This seems like a complicated situation. In a daze, I followed them into what had been my house. The furniture was different. My grandfather's beloved leather armchair was gone, replaced by a modern sectional sofa. The fishing photographs that had lined the hallway had been replaced with abstract landscapes. Only the bones of the house remained familiar. The exposed beams sealing the river rock fireplace, the wide windows overlooking the lake. David disappeared briefly and returned with a folder of documents. We purchased the property from Robert and Elizabeth Harper, he explained, showing me the sale agreement. The transaction closed 6 weeks ago. Everything seemed in order with the paperwork. My parents' signatures stared up at me from the page alongside a signature that purported to be mine but definitely was not. The sale price, $480,000, was well below market value for lakefront property in the area. "This is not my signature," I said, my voice shaking. "I never authorized this sale. My parents, they forged my signature." The Mercers looked horrified. "We had no idea," Laura said. "The real estate agent assured us everything was legitimate." "Which agency?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "Lakeside Realty. Our agent was Jennifer Williams." My stomach dropped further. Jennifer Williams was Craig's aunt. My soon-to-be brother-in-law's relative had facilitated this fraudulent sale. I thanked the Mercers for their cooperation, apologized for the confusion, and promised I would be in touch once I sorted things out with my family. As I drove away, my vision blurred with tears of rage and betrayal. Instead of heading back to the city, I pointed my car toward my parents' house, determined to confront them immediately. The 40-minute drive gave me time to cycle through shocked disbelief and finally a cold, clear anger. My parents had not only sold my property without permission, they had committed fraud by forging my signature. And for what? Catherine's extravagant wedding to a man she had known less than a year. When I pulled into their driveway, I noticed several cars parked along the street. With a jolt, I remembered this was the weekend of Catherine's bridal shower. Perfect. The celebration for the event that had cost me my lake house. I found my mother and several of her friends in the backyard, hanging decorations in the wedding colors of blush pink and gold. Mom's face registered surprise when she saw me. "Alexis, we were not expecting you. The shower does not start for another hour." "I need to speak with you and Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Now." Something in my expression must have alarmed her because she quickly excused herself from her friends and called for my father. We gathered in the kitchen away from the decoration committee. "What is going on?" Dad asked, a nervous edge to his voice that told me he already knew. "I just came from the lake house," I said, watching their faces carefully. Imagine my surprise when I found strangers living there. Strangers who told me they bought the property from you 6 weeks ago. My mother's hand flew to her throat, but my father maintained eye contact, his expression hardening into defensiveness. "We were going to tell you after the wedding," he said. "We did not want to distract from Catherine's big day." "Distract?" I repeated, incredulous. "You sold my property I legally owned, without my consent. You forged my signature on legal documents. That is fraud, Dad. Criminal fraud." "Do not be so dramatic," my mother interjected. "It is just a house. You have a wonderful career and can buy another property anytime. Catherine needed this. Her wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event." The casual dismissal of my inheritance, the special connection I had shared with my grandfather, struck me like a physical blow. "Just a house," Grandpa left it to me, not to the family. He trusted me to preserve it. "Your grandfather always played favorites," my father said bitterly. "He knew we could have used that asset for the whole family's benefit, but he had to make his point by leaving it to you alone." Before I could respond to this stunning revelation of resentment, the back door swung open, and Catherine swept in, surrounded by a cloud of expensive perfume. She was glowing in a white sundress, her engagement ring catching the light. "What is going on? Why are you all in here when there is so much to do outside?" she demanded before noticing me. "Oh, Alexis, you are early." "Catherine," my mother said warningly, "now is not a good time." But Catherine had already assessed the tension in the room and somehow intuited the topic. A small, satisfied smile played at her lips. "Oh, did you tell her about the lake house? I was wondering when that would come up." You knew, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Catherine shrugged elegantly. Of course I knew. How did you think we were paying for Lakeside Gardens? Craig's parents are only covering the rehearsal dinner. And you were okay with them selling my property without my knowledge or consent. She laughed, actually laughed, and said the words that would echo in my mind for months to come. Thanks for the wedding present, sis. I knew you would come through in the end. In that moment, looking at my sister's smug expression and my parents' defensive postures, something crystallized within me. This was not a misunderstanding or a one-time betrayal. This was the culmination of a lifetime of being undervalued, overlooked, and expected to sacrifice for Catherine's wants. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house, their calls following me down the driveway. As I drove away, I made 2 phone calls. First to my friend Samantha, who happened to be a real estate attorney, and then to Jordan, my best friend since college, who had always seen my family dynamics more clearly than I had. The lake house was gone for now, but this was far from over. My family had awakened something in me they had never seen before, a determination to stand up for myself regardless of the cost to our relationship. The days following my discovery passed in a blur of emotional turmoil. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, unable to focus on code when my personal life had crashed so spectacularly. Instead, I holed up in my apartment, alternating between bouts of intense anger and overwhelming grief. My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from my family. My mother's texts escalated from defensive. We were going to tell you after the wedding to guilt-inducing. Your sister is in tears over your reaction to outright manipulative. If your grandfather could see you being so selfish. My father's approach was more practical, but equally infuriating, offering to cut me in on a portion of the proceeds from the sale as if my inheritance could be reduced to a simple financial transaction. Catherine sent a single text way to make everything about you as usual. This is my time. I responded to none of them needing space to process what had happened without their justifications clouding my judgment. On the 3rd day, Samantha came over with legal pads, her laptop, and a bottle of good whiskey. We spread out at my dining table as she explained my options. This is clear-cut property fraud, she said, her professional demeanor momentarily giving way to personal outrage. They forged your signature on legally binding documents. That is criminal activity, Alexis. Could I go to jail for this? I asked, thinking of my parents being led away in handcuffs. Despite everything, the image made me sick to my stomach. You are the victim here. Your parents, however. She let the implication hang in the air. But there are other approaches. We could pursue this as a civil rather than criminal matter. The goal would be to void the sale and return the property to you. What about the Mercers? The couple who bought it? They are innocent purchasers, but unfortunately for them, you cannot legally sell what you do not own. They would have recourse against your parents for misrepresentation, but the property should revert to you. I massaged my temples, trying to think through the haze of betrayal. My grandfather wanted that house to stay in the family. He told me so on his deathbed. Promise me you will keep this place, Lexi, he said. Do not let anyone convince you to sell it. Some things are worth more than money. My voice broke on the last words, and Samantha reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Then we fight for it, she said simply. That night, I dreamed of my grandfather. We were sitting on the dock, fishing poles in hand, watching the sunset paint the lake in gold and crimson. People will disappoint you, Lexi, he said in the dream, his voice just as I remembered it. Even the ones who are supposed to love you most. The trick is to know your own worth, even when they do not. I woke up with tears on my cheeks, but a strange sense of clarity. This was not just about a piece of property. It was about standing up for myself after a lifetime of being expected to step aside for Catherine. Jordan came over the next day, bringing groceries and practical support. Unlike my other friends who responded to the situation with shocked outrage, Jordan had always seen the dysfunction in my family. I hate to say I told you so, she said, unpacking vegetables and placing them in my nearly empty refrigerator, but your sister has been the center of your parents' universe since you were kids. Remember when they missed your college graduation because Catherine had a pageant the same weekend? I did remember. I had walked across the stage to receive my honors degree in computer science with no family there to cheer for me. My grandfather had come using a cane after his recent knee surgery, But my parents had been 3 states away watching Catherine compete for a title she ultimately lost. I always told myself they did their best, I said, helping Jordan organize the groceries. That they loved us equally but just connected with Catherine more easily. That is the story you told yourself to make their behavior acceptable, Jordan replied, her bluntness. One of the qualities I valued most about her. But selling your property without consent, that crosses from favoritism into something much darker. Over the next few days, I threw myself into research, learning everything I could about property law in cases similar to mine. I discovered that my parents had not only sold the property fraudulently, but had accepted a price significantly under market value. Comparable lakefront properties in the area were selling for $650,000 to $700,000. They had accepted $480,000, a nearly 30% discount. They were desperate for cash, Samantha explained when I showed her my findings. Probably needed to close quickly to pay wedding vendors. Distressed sellers often accept less than market value. The more I learned, the clearer it became that this was not an impulsive decision, but a calculated plan. They had specifically worked with Craig's aunt as the realtor likely to keep the transaction quiet. They had timed it during my Seattle business trip when I would be too preoccupied to visit the lake house. They had intended to hide the sale until after Catherine's wedding, by which time the money would be spent and they could present it as a fait accompli. The realization that this betrayal had been carefully orchestrated made it infinitely worse. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a conscious choice made repeatedly over weeks or months. Through it all, I struggled with an internal conflict. Part of me wanted to preserve family peace at any cost, to accept their hollow apologies and move forward without legal action. This was the part conditioned by years of being the reasonable one, the daughter who did not make waves. But a stronger voice was emerging, one that sounded remarkably like my grandfather. This voice insisted that without consequences, nothing would change. My parents and sister would continue to take advantage of my generosity and goodwill, seeing me as a resource rather than a person with my own needs and boundaries. After a week of deliberation, I made my decision. I called Samantha and asked her to prepare the legal documents to contest the sale. Then I texted my parents I would like to meet for dinner next Friday to discuss the situation. Just the 4 of us, please. My mother responded immediately. We are so relieved, sweetheart. We will make your favorite lasagna. Everything will be okay. Her assumption that I was coming to reconcile without accountability irritated me, but I let it pass. The time for true communication would come soon enough. The next week was consumed with preparations. Samantha helped me gather all the necessary documentation proving my ownership of the property. We compiled evidence of the fraud, including handwriting analysis confirming the forgery of my signature. I consulted with a therapist to prepare emotionally for the confrontation, practicing setting boundaries without escalating into unproductive arguments. As Friday approached, I felt a strange calm descend. Whatever happened with my family, I knew I was finally advocating for myself in a way I never had before. The lake house might be temporarily lost, but I was finding something perhaps more valuable, my voice. The night before the meeting, Jordan called to check on me. Are you sure you do not want me to come with you tomorrow? I could wait in the car as backup. I appreciate that, but no, I replied. This is something I need to do alone. If I bring reinforcements, they will just see it as an attack. Well, I will have ice cream and bad movies ready when you get back, regardless of how it goes. I smiled at her unwavering support. Thanks, Jordan, for everything. As I tried to sleep that night, I thought about family, not just the one we are born into, but the one we create through friendship and mutual respect. Whatever happened tomorrow, I was not truly alone. I had people in my corner who valued me for exactly who I was, not for what I could give them or sacrifice. That knowledge gave me the strength to face what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 6:30, the time we had agreed upon. The familiar drive up to their colonial-style home felt different now, as if I were approaching a business meeting rather than a family dinner. I had dressed deliberately in a crisp blue button-down and black pants, professional attire that made me feel armored for what was to come. My mother opened the door before I could ring the bell, her expression a complicated mixture of relief and wariness. Alexis, come in. Dinner is almost ready. The house smelled of garlic and tomato sauce, She had indeed made lasagna as promised. The dining room table was set with the good china, a peace offering of sorts. My father emerged from his study looking older than I remembered. "Good to see you, Alexis. Can I get you a drink?" "Just water, thanks," I replied, determined to keep a clear head. We engaged in stilted small talk as Mom finished dinner preparations, the weather traffic on the way over a neighbor's new landscaping, safe topics that skated around the elephant in the room. Catherine's name was conspicuously absent from conversation. Once we were seated with steaming plates before us, my father cleared his throat. "We are glad you wanted to talk, Alexis. Your mother and I have been very concerned about how things left off last week." I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. I needed time to process what happened. Finding out that my property had been sold without my knowledge or consent was devastating. "We understand you are upset," my mother interjected quickly, "but we hope you can see this from our perspective too. Catherine's wedding is important to all of us as a family." "I would like to explain my perspective first," I said calmly. "I have listened to your justifications. Now I need you to hear me." Something in my tone must have registered because they both fell silent forks, paused midair. 4 years ago, Grandpa entrusted me with the lake house because he believed I would honor its significance to our family. He could have left it to either of you or to Catherine or instructed that it be sold and the proceeds divided. He chose me specifically. "Your grandfather always had his favorites," my father muttered. "This is not about favorites, Dad. This is about trust. He trusted me, and I have honored that trust. I allowed you both to use the property whenever you wanted. I maintained it with my own money. I never once considered selling it, even when I could have used the cash for my own purposes." I paused, making eye contact with each of them. "And then, without a single conversation with me, you sold it out from under me. You forged my signature on legal documents. You deliberately timed this during my business trip to Seattle. You planned to hide it until after Catherine's wedding." "We were going to tell you," my mother protested weakly. After the money was spent and the deed was done, I countered. "That is not a conversation. That is an announcement of a fait accompli." My father's jaw tightened. Catherine's wedding venue required a 50% deposit. We did not have that kind of cash available. What were we supposed to do? Tell her she could not have her dream wedding? "Yes," I said simply. "Or at least discuss other options. Scale down the wedding. Look for alternative venues. Ask Catherine and Craig to contribute more. Approach me honestly about the situation. Any of those would have been better than fraud." "You make it sound so clinical," my mother said, tears forming in her eyes. "We are family. Families help each other." "Help is freely given, not taken without permission," I replied, my voice still steady. "What you did was not help, it was theft." The word hung in the air between us, harsh but accurate. My father pushed his plate away, anger replacing defensiveness. "We raised you, put a roof over your head, food in your mouth. Everything we have ever done has been for you girls. And now you throw around words like theft and fraud, as if we are criminals." I met his gaze without flinching. "What would you call forging someone's signature on property documents if not fraud?" Before he could answer, the front door opened and Catherine's voice rang out. "Hello, where is everyone?" My mother shot me a panicked look. I did not invite her, I swear. Catherine appeared in the dining room doorway, immaculately dressed as always. Her expression soured when she saw me. "Oh, you are speaking to the family again." "Catherine," my father said warningly. "Alexis and we are having a private conversation." "About the lake house, I assume." She sauntered in and helped herself to a glass of wine from the bottle on the table. "I do not see why everyone is making such a big deal about this. It is just a musty old cabin." The dismissive way she referred to my grandfather's beloved home, the place where he had taught me to fish, where we had watched meteor showers from the dock, where he had shared stories of his own childhood, ignited something in me. "That musty old cabin was legally mine," I said, my voice low but intense. "Grandpa left it to me because he knew I valued it beyond its price tag." Catherine rolled her eyes. Always the favorite grandchild. Some things never change. "This is not about favoritism," I insisted. "This is about respecting others' property and boundaries." "Property and boundaries," she mimicked. So cold and legalistic. This is why people find you so difficult to connect with, Alexis. Everything is black and white rules and regulations. My mother attempted to defuse the situation. Girls, please. We are family. Surely we can work this out. That is why I came here tonight, I said, refocusing the conversation, to see if we could find a resolution that acknowledges the harm done. Harm, Catherine scoffed. You have a 6-figure salary and an apartment in Manhattan. Mom and Dad paid for my education, but you got the lake house worth $750,000. If anyone has been harmed by unfair treatment, it is me. I stared at her, genuinely perplexed by her perspective. Catherine, do you really not understand the difference between parents choosing to pay for your education and stealing someone else's inherited property? They would not have had to steal anything if you had offered to help with my wedding in the first place, she shot back. You have barely shown any interest in the most important day of my life. Because every time I tried to engage, my input was dismissed, I explained, struggling to maintain my composure. When I suggested more affordable venues, you accused me of trying to ruin your wedding. Because a Hampton Country Club wedding is so beneath me, right? Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Catherine, that is not what I... You have always been jealous of me, she interrupted. Just because men actually find me attractive and I have a social life, not everyone wants to be a boring computer nerd living alone with their code. I took a deep breath, recognizing her attempts to derail the conversation with personal attacks. This is not productive. We need to address the actual issue at hand. My father, who had been watching this exchange with growing agitation, suddenly slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. Enough, he shouted. You want to know the truth, Alexis. We needed the money because we already spent your college fund on Catherine years ago. The room fell silent. My mother's face drained of color. Robert, do not. No, Elizabeth. She wants honesty. Let us give her honesty. He turned back to me, his expression a mixture of defiance and shame. Your scholarships covered most of your education. What was left in your college fund we used for Catherine's first year at Wellesley when our investments took a hit. We always intended to replace it, but then came her junior year abroad, then her graduate program. I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. You spent my college fund on Catherine, the money Grandpa set aside for me when I was born. We did what we thought was best for the family as a whole, my mother said quietly. Catherine needed more support than you did. You were always so independent, so capable. Being capable does not mean I deserved less, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Being self-sufficient does not mean I mattered less. No one is saying you mattered less, my father insisted, but the evidence of their actions over decades said otherwise. I stood up slowly, my dinner untouched. I came here hoping we could have an honest conversation about moving forward. I can see now that is not possible without first acknowledging the patterns that brought us here. I reached into my bag and removed a manila envelope. Inside is a notice that I am legally contesting the sale of the lake house on grounds of fraudulent representation and forged documents. My attorney will be in touch with the Mercer's legal team and the real estate agency this week. My mother began to cry in earnest now. Alexis, please. This will tear the family apart. The family was already torn apart, I replied softly. Not by my actions, but by years of inequality and now by fraud. Catherine had gone pale, the reality of the situation finally seeming to register. But the wedding is next weekend. What about my venue? The deposits? That is between you, Craig, and our parents, I said. I am simply reclaiming what was legally mine. You selfish bitch, she hissed. You are going to ruin everything. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a wave of sadness. I am not responsible for fixing problems I did not create, Catherine. For once, the consequences of this family's decisions will not fall solely on my shoulders. As I walked toward the door, my father called after me. If you do this, if you take legal action against your own parents, do not expect to be welcomed back. I turned to face them one last time. I will be at Catherine's wedding next weekend as promised. I have already given my RSVP and would not disrupt her day. But after that, I think we all need to reconsider what family really means. To me, it should involve mutual respect, honesty, and support, not exploitation of the most reliable member. With that, I walked out the door, leaving behind the remnants of a family dinner and decades of unbalanced expectations. The night air felt cool against my flushed skin as I drove away, a strange mixture of grief and liberation washing over me. I had finally spoken my truth regardless of whether they were ready to hear it. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. Catherine's wedding day arrived with perfect weather, sunshine and blue skies, as if the universe itself were endorsing her special day. I had debated not attending right up until the morning of the ceremony, but ultimately decided that absent myself would only give my family another grievance to hold against me. Besides, I had promised I would be there, and unlike some members of my family, I kept my promises. I wore a simple navy blue dress, elegant but understated. My goal was to blend into the background as much as possible, to be present without drawing attention. The legal proceedings I had initiated were working their way through the system, but I had specifically requested that no documents be served during the wedding weekend. This day was about Catherine, as she had so often reminded everyone, and I would respect that even if I disagreed with how it had been financed. The ceremony was held at Lakeside Gardens as planned, with 300 guests seated on white chairs on the immaculately manicured lawn. Flowers worth thousands of dollars adorned every surface, and a string quartet played as Catherine walked down the aisle on our father's arm. She was radiant in a designer gown with a cathedral-length veil, every inch the princess bride she had always dreamed of being. I sat in the back row on the bride's side, exchanging brief nods with distant relatives and family friends. Most were unaware of the lake house situation, though a few gave me curious or sympathetic looks, suggesting rumors had begun to circulate. During the reception, I maintained a low profile, making polite conversation when approached, but otherwise keeping to myself. I noticed my parents working overtime to appear joyful and at ease, though the strain showed around their eyes. They had greeted me with stiff civility during the receiving line, but otherwise kept their distance. It was Craig's Aunt Jennifer, the realtor who had facilitated the fraudulent sale, who approached me at the dessert table. "Alexis, I had no idea about the situation with the lake house property," she said in a hushed voice. "I was told you had agreed to the sale but were too busy to attend the closing in person." "An understandable misunderstanding," I replied neutrally, though we both knew it was anything but. My attorney had already contacted her brokerage firm. "If there's anything I can do to help resolve this situation," she offered, clearly concerned about her professional liability. "I think it's best we let our respective legal representatives handle things from here," I said, selecting a petite four from the lavish display and effectively ending the conversation. As the evening progressed, I fulfilled my social obligations, including a brief dance with one of Craig's cousins and appropriate applause during the toasts. When the time came to present gifts, I approached the elaborate table with a simple card envelope in hand. Catherine eyed it suspiciously as I placed it among the wrapped packages. "Just a card," she asked with a tight smile. "How economical of you." "The gift inside is quite substantial, actually," I replied calmly. My parents, hovering nearby, exchanged worried glances. It was nearly midnight when Catherine and Craig finally opened their gifts, surrounded by their closest friends and family members in a VIP lounge area. I had remained only because I wanted to see their reaction to my gift. When Catherine opened my card, her expression shifted from expectant to confused. Inside was a simple note that read, "Legal proceedings to void the fraudulent sale of my lake house property have begun. Congratulations on your marriage." "What is this supposed to mean?" Craig asked, reading over her shoulder. Catherine's face flushed with anger. "She's suing us on our wedding day." "Not you," I clarified. "The lawsuit names my parents and the real estate agency. You and Craig aren't defendants unless evidence emerges of your direct involvement in the fraud." My mother pressed her hand to her mouth while my father's face darkened ominously. "You actually went through with it," he said, disbelief coloring his tone, "after everything we discussed." "Yes," I confirmed simply. "The papers were filed 3 days ago. I kept my word about not having anything served during the wedding." Craig was now reading the card more carefully, his finance background apparently allowing him to grasp the implications more quickly than Catherine. "This could affect the property sale proceeds," he said slowly. "The money that paid for all of this." The realization spread across the small group like a cold wave. The lavish wedding they were currently enjoying, from the premium venue to the top-shelf liquor to the designer dress, had been funded by my stolen inheritance. And now that transaction was being legally challenged. "You've ruined everything," Catherine whispered, tears welling in her eyes. This was supposed to be perfect. I met her gaze steadily. I didn't create this situation, Catherine. I'm just refusing to be its victim. With that, I wished them a pleasant honeymoon and took my leave, walking out of Lakeside Gardens, and in many ways out of my family's lives as I had known them. The legal process unfolded over the following months with all the complexity I had expected. The Mercers, upon receiving formal notice that the sale was being contested immediately, filed their own lawsuit against my parents for misrepresentation. The real estate agency suspended Jennifer Williams pending an internal investigation, and the county prosecutor's office opened an inquiry into the forgery aspects of the case. My parents initially tried to fight the allegations, hiring an expensive attorney who attempted to argue that as my guardians during my formative years, they had implicit authority to make decisions regarding family property. This argument collapsed quickly when it was pointed out that I was 34 years old, financially independent, and the clear legal owner of the lake house per my grandfather's properly executed will. 3 months after the wedding, with mounting legal fees and the prospect of criminal charges looming, my parents capitulated. They agreed to a settlement that required them to take out a second mortgage on their home to repay the Mercers in full plus damages. The lake house deed would be returned to my name, though the property had already suffered from hasty renovations the Mercers had begun. Catherine and Craig returned from their 3-week European honeymoon to find this legal mess waiting for them. Rather than supporting my parents through the crisis, Catherine's primary concern was the potential social embarrassment of having her wedding retroactively tainted by scandal. "What will people think when they find out our wedding was paid for with stolen money?" she wailed during a phone call with our mother that I heard about through a sympathetic aunt. "Craig's family is mortified. His mother is barely speaking to me." The fractures in my family deepened and multiplied. Catherine blamed our parents for not handling the situation better and resented me for not letting it go for the sake of family harmony. My parents, facing significant financial strain from the settlement and legal fees, began to turn on each other, with my father blaming my mother for insisting on such an extravagant wedding, and my mother criticizing my father for the clumsy way he had executed the fraudulent sale. Through it all, I maintained minimal contact, responding to texts and emails with brief factual replies, but declining invitations for family gatherings. The holidays approached and passed with me celebrating with friends rather than relatives. Jordan hosted Thanksgiving, and I spent Christmas with Samantha and her family, who welcomed me warmly. In February, 6 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected email from Craig. He asked if we could meet for coffee without Catherine or my parents' knowledge. Curious, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe in the financial district during his lunch break. He looked tired, the polished veneer I remembered from the wedding somewhat dimmed. "I want to apologize," he said after we had settled with our drinks. "I didn't know about the lake house situation until after it had happened. Catherine presented it as if you had willingly contributed to our wedding, and I didn't question it." I studied him, looking for signs of deception, but finding what appeared to be genuine regret. "When did you find out the truth?" "About a week before the wedding," he admitted. "I overheard your parents arguing about potential legal ramifications. By then, everything was paid for, vendors were confirmed. I told myself it was a family matter that would be resolved." That was a convenient interpretation, I observed. He nodded, accepting the criticism. "I come from a family where appearances matter above all else. Walking away from the wedding would have been unthinkable. But I've had a lot of time to reflect, and I realize I became complicit through my silence." "Why are you telling me this now?" Craig sighed, rotating his coffee cup between his hands. "Because this situation has revealed things about Catherine and myself that I'm not proud of. The way she's handled this, blaming everyone but acknowledging no responsibility. It's troubling." I felt a flicker of sympathy for him. Patterns that have been reinforced for decades don't change overnight. "No," he agreed quietly. "They don't." We parted with no dramatic reconciliation, but with perhaps a small bridge extended across the chasm that had opened in our family. It wasn't much, but it was something, an acknowledgement of wrong and a tentative step toward accountability. As for the lake house, it sat empty through the winter, waiting for spring, when I would begin the process of reclaiming it both legally and emotionally. The property was mine again on paper, but the sense of violation lingered. The sacred space my grandfather had entrusted to me had been tainted by betrayal. Yet even in this painful outcome, I found an unexpected gift clarity about my worth and my boundaries. For the first time in my life, I had refused to be the family shock absorber, the one who silently accepted unequal treatment for the sake of peace. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, no longer defined by what my family thought I should sacrifice, but by what I knew I deserved. 6 months after regaining legal ownership of the lake house, I stood on the newly rebuilt dock watching the sunset paint the water in shades of amber and gold. The spring and early summer had been devoted to reclaiming this space, not just physically repairing what the Mercers had changed, but emotionally reconnecting with what this property meant to me. The first time I returned after the settlement, I had barely made it through the front door before breaking down. Everything felt wrong. The walls the Mercers had painted a sterile white, the modern fixtures they had installed, the absence of my grandfather's worn leather armchair. It was like walking into a stranger's approximation of my sanctuary. Jordan had come with me that day, silently holding my hand as I moved from room to room cataloging changes and losses. "We can fix this," she had said finally. "Not exactly the way it was, but in a way that honors your grandfather while making new memories." That became my project and my therapy. Each weekend, I drove up from the city and worked on restoring one aspect of the house. I tracked down a leather armchair, similar to my grandfather's at an antique store. I repainted the walls in the warm colors he had chosen. I rehung fishing photographs alongside new ones I had taken of the lake. The most significant project was rebuilding the dock. The Mercers had torn down the old one, planning to replace it with a larger structure, but had abandoned the project mid-construction when the legal notices arrived. For 3 weekends straight, I worked with a local carpenter named Frank, who had known my grandfather. Thomas was particular about his dock, Frank told me as we measured lumber. Said a good dock was like a good friend, reliable, strong, but not flashy, just there when you need it. That sounded exactly like something my grandfather would say, and I found myself smiling through tears as we worked. By the time we finished, the new dock was almost identical to the original one, where I had spent countless hours fishing with Grandpa Thomas. As spring turned to summer, I began to heal in other ways too. My relationship with my parents remained strained, but was slowly evolving into something more honest. After 2 months of minimal contact, my father had reached out with a letter, an actual handwritten letter, acknowledging the harm they had caused. "I won't make excuses," he wrote. "What we did was wrong on every level. The truth, which is hard to admit, is that your mother and I have always found Catherine easier to understand and connect with. That's our failing, not yours. Your grandfather saw in you what we were too blind to appreciate, a strength of character and principle that is rare. I am sorry we betrayed your trust and sorrier still that it took losing it to recognize its value." It wasn't a magical fix, but it was a start. We began with occasional phone calls, then a brief lunch near my office. My mother struggled more with accountability, still slipping into justifications about family obligations, but she too was making efforts. We were rebuilding, if not the same relationship as before then, perhaps a more authentic one, based on mutual respect rather than expected sacrifice. Catherine remained the most distant. She and Craig had moved to Boston for his work, and while she occasionally sent terse text messages on birthdays or holidays, real communication had ceased. The one time I suggested we talk through what had happened, she responded that she wasn't interested in being villainized for wanting a nice wedding. I let it go, recognizing that her journey towards self-awareness would be her own on her own timeline. Surprisingly, Craig maintained occasional contact, sending a thoughtful email when he heard I had been promoted to lead architect at my company, and even asking advice when he was considering investing in a tech startup. These small connections suggested that perhaps in time, bridges could be rebuilt even if they looked different than before. The most profound healing, though, came from what I created at the lake house in the absence of my original family. 3 months after reclaiming the property, I hosted a weekend retreat for women in my tech network who had experienced workplace discrimination. 6 of us spent 3 days sharing stories, supporting each other, and kayaking on the lake at sunrise. This place has amazing energy. Priya, one of my colleagues, observed our last evening together. "You can feel that it's been loved." Her words resonated deeply. Despite everything that had happened, the essence of what my grandfather had created here remained intact. The property was more than land and buildings. It was a space where authenticity and mutual respect flourished. By sharing it with my chosen family of friends and colleagues, I was honoring his legacy in ways I hadn't initially imagined. On this particular evening, 6 months after reclaiming ownership, I was alone at the dock reflecting on everything that had transpired. The legal battles were finally settled. The Mercers had been repaid in full by my parents and had purchased another property on the other side of the lake. My parents were slowly rebuilding their finances, having had to downsize their home to cover the settlement costs. As I watched the sun sink lower, casting long shadows across the water, I thought about what property really means. It's not just about ownership on paper or the monetary value of land. It's about boundaries. The physical ones that define where your space begins and ends, but also the emotional ones that determine how you allow yourself to be treated. My grandfather had understood this. The lake house wasn't just his gift to me. It was his vote of confidence in my ability to hold boundaries, to value myself even when others didn't. In fighting for this property, I had finally lived up to that faith. The water lapped gently against the dock posts as dusk deepened. A family of ducks glided past the mother, leading her babies in a perfect line across the still surface. Nature's example of both protection and gradual independence. I thought about generational patterns and how difficult they are to break. My parents had recreated with their daughters the same favoritism they had likely experienced in their own upbringings. Catherine and I had each responded to that dynamic in our own ways. She by expecting preferential treatment, me by accepting less than I deserved. But patterns can be disrupted. Standing up for myself had been painful and had cost me certain family relationships, at least temporarily. Yet it had also freed me to create new patterns based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. The first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky when my phone chimed with a text from Jordan: "Still on for brunch tomorrow. Bringing that sourdough bread you like." I smiled as I replied affirmatively. This was what family could be. People who showed up consistently, who gave without keeping score, who celebrated your boundaries rather than testing them. As night settled fully over the lake, I made my way back to the house, switching on the porch light my grandfather had installed decades ago. Its warm glow illuminated the path home, a beacon of continuity amid change. Inside, I added another log to the fireplace and settled into the leather armchair with a book. The house creaked and settled around me, no longer a site of betrayal, but once again, a sanctuary. Not exactly as it had been before. Both the house and I had been changed by what we had endured, but perhaps stronger for having weathered the storm. My grandfather used to say that healing isn't about erasing scars, but about wearing them with the knowledge that you survived. 6 months after reclaiming my lake house, I was finally beginning to understand what he meant. The pain of family betrayal would always be part of my story, but it would not be the end of it. The path forward was still unfolding, one day at a time, one conscious choice after another. Whatever came next, I would face it knowing my own worth, honoring those who truly loved me, and protecting the boundaries that define not just my property, but my self-respect. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family members who took advantage of your generosity? I would love to hear your stories of setting boundaries and reclaiming your power. Please share in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more honest conversations about family dynamics. Remember that your worth is not determined by how much you sacrifice for others. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to protect what matters most to you.